But honestly, with ADHD and lots of other things going on here, you're unstoppable sometimes when you're interested in a topic. And I see that in my kids even today. And even in school now, like they're going to school and they're still following their interest. They're utilizing that driving force now still in so many ways. And it's really exciting to see. And that's something you have to like experience and know how it feels to follow your interest, be curious, follow that curiosity, deep dive on something. During homeschooling, it was like we would give ourselves lots of time and space to kind of hyper focus on things sometimes. And it was just the most amazing learning ever. It was so great. And so it's really nice to be able to actually feel that and feel celebrated by doing that, because it really doesn't get celebrated often in a traditional classroom.
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilled Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. Many parents of neurodivergent kids end up homeschooling at some point or another for a period of time, some by choice, some because the school environment stopped being the right fit for our kids. If homeschooling is something you've considered, have done, or are currently doing, you're going to love this episode. I'm joined by Maren Goerss and Angela Sizer, two former teachers turned homeschooling parents and advocates, the hosts of the Homeschool Unrefined podcast, and the authors of the brand new book, Think Differently About Learning, a homeschool where parents and children thrive. I love this conversation where we explored homeschooling from many different angles, including considerations when homeschooling neurodivergent kids, the common barriers parents face, and why trusting the process in our children is crucial yet challenging in a homeschool environment. We also talk about the way viewing our children as individuals worthy of respect and autonomy can revolutionize the learning experience, and how following our children's interests can lead to more meaningful and effective education. You might be familiar with Angela and Maren from their podcast, but if not, here's a little bit about them. Angela Sizer earned her master's in teaching and taught in public schools for 7 years. For a decade, she homeschooled her own children and loved watching them explore their passions and get excited about learning. And Maren Goerss has her master's in education and taught elementary school for 8 years. As part of a neurodivergent family, Maren sees learning differences as superpowers and leans into their strengths. After being a homeschool parent for years, Maren has become an ADHD parent and life coach. Together, Angela and Maren created the podcast Homeschool Unrefined in 2016 to share their experience and knowledge as educators and homeschoolers while encouraging parents to notice how their children are always learning. They advocate for doing less, leaning into strengths, and enjoying the process. That sounds like a great plan to me. So even if you're not homeschooling or are not considering homeschooling, this episode really has valuable parenting lessons for us all. I hope you enjoy it. Hey, Angela and Maren, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Yes, I'm excited to have you on the show. I haven't done an episode about homeschooling in general in a long time, and I get a ton of questions. So I'm excited to get into your book, but I actually want to spend a few minutes introducing you guys to my audience. I'm sure that many of my listeners are familiar with your Homeschool Unrefined podcast, which has been a great resource for so many years, including a great resource for me personally. So tell us a little bit about who you are, how you came together to be collaborating on the podcast and on your work together, and now your new book.
Okay, Maren and I have similar stories. We've been friends for a really long time. We met in college, so years. Decades.
At this point.
And we both decided to homeschool around the same time, and we live in the same area. And so we hung out together, talked about it a lot, talked about what our ideas about education and homeschooling, because we were both former teachers who decided to move into homeschooling, which felt really weird to us and different and like rebellious. And so we had all these really important ideas about how kids learn and how kids should be educated, or, about playing all the time. We would talk about that together. And then, in 2016, we decided to start a podcast so that we could talk about those ideas with a broader community, because we really wanted a community of people who we could bounce ideas off of, where we could learn from them, they could learn from us. So that was really important to us. We started this podcast in 2016, and we've been doing it ever since.
You said it so well. I think one of the reasons why we started the podcast too was because we were like, well, we kind of feel like we're doing this alone. Just the two of us were in this, like, it felt like a very separate thing from so many other people that we knew. And so we just thought, we know there are other people out there who are homeschooling for the same reasons as us. And it's not necessarily a religious reason. We're really looking at the whole child and our family. We just wanted to connect so much with those people. And we couldn't find them necessarily in our neighborhood or our city, but we knew they were out there. So that's why we started the podcast.
Yeah. And you guys started at the same year I started this podcast. So congratulations. So homeschooling, I want to set the tone for this conversation because it is a complex topic. We all do it for different reasons. A lot of listeners of this show are what I would define as reluctant homeschoolers. That's what I certainly was. I became an honored, joyful homeschooling parent, but it took a while. I just want to create an overall foundation for this conversation in terms of how do we even think about homeschooling? Because I think as soon as you mention the word, people are going to ding to their own interpretation of it, but set a tone for us in terms of the homeschooling world that we're going to dive into today.
I think we both had to definitely almost deconstruct our idea of education and what learning really is. And I think that's been the work since we started homeschooling. And these are just a lot of the components of our podcast and our book too, which is giving ourselves and our kids credit for all the learning we're all doing all the time. Everything's learning. And so some of the work is letting go of the formal academic guidelines or even expectations that we put on our kids and changing that to really celebrating all the learning that they're doing right now today.
That's really good. And I feel like when we started, when you have a child under 5, that's kind of what you're doing. I mean, that is what you're doing. Know? And so then there's this expectation when your child is going to be in kindergarten or first grade or wherever that, oh, now the real learning happens. Now there's a big change. They're going to school. This is really important. And I came to the realization when my child was 5 that I wanted to keep doing what we were doing because I saw all the important things we were doing during the day, all the important play and all the like sibling interactions and family dynamics and things that were happening during the day was so important. And if she was going to go to school, she would miss out on that. And in fact, she did go to school for kindergarten half days and it was very taxing. Like it was very taxing on her. And she only went half day and she loved school. She loved school and loved her teacher and loved her friends. And so it wasn't really about that. It was just about later we learned there's some neurodivergence with her too. It just was not the right setting for her. And I felt like trusting myself and my child had to be at the forefront because I had this feeling, this little voice in the back of my head saying like, is this really right? And it was weird because I was a teacher. So it was weird to have that feeling, but I was like, I don't know. And I had been reading books and learning, and I just decided to trust the voice and trust my child to know that learning can happen, like Maren said, all the time, and that it doesn't have to be in a formal setting.
So I think it's interesting that you both have backgrounds in education and we're teachers because two things, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. One is there are people who think, well, I'm not qualified to be my child's homeschool teacher because I'm not a teacher. So you guys are. So I just want to put that out there. And you also, for a period of time, opted out of a traditional educational system that you were both part of as teachers and then made that choice. I think that's just so fascinating. And I'm curious to know a little bit more about your own personal grappling with that choice, or was there a backlash from peers, and just a little bit how you reconciled that?
I would say like being a teacher made it actually difficult for us to homeschool, especially at first, because I know I did. I know, Angela, I know that you went through this too, where we had to really we had to change our whole mind shift, have a big mind shift on again, about like how learning actually happens and what learning looks like is a big thing. Like it's not always the outcome. It's not always the paper. It's not always the assignment. It's always in the process too. It's always in this process that we most of the time don't give our kids credit for. Also, I think, we both came to teaching probably because of lots of our characteristics about ourselves. For example, like our empathy, our ability to connect with kids, just like a lot of these characteristics about ourselves that, we saw and we thought, well, we probably be good at teaching. This might be a good fit for us. But I think we write about this in the book that like a lot of that changed when we became teachers. Like we weren't able to always use some of our biggest strengths in teaching because we had to do a lot of paperwork and write a lot of lesson plans and go to a lot of meetings and do a lot of things that like weren't necessarily in our wheelhouse or the things that we even valued the most. So I actually think it may be helpful if you're not a teacher and you didn't have to go through all that before homeschooling.
Yeah. And I would just add, I think a lot of homeschoolers are insecure. I mean, we're all insecure about what we're doing. I don't want to generalize. That's what I was. Is this the right thing for my kid? Am I going to be screwing them up? I'm going against the grain. Everybody I know thinks I'm weird or whatever. And so to look at somebody and be like, well, you're a teacher, so of course you can do it, I think makes them feel a certain way, but it's short-sighted because my teaching background, I have a license in science, middle school to high school science. So that's not the same as like working with my 5-year-old. It's different. I feel like the skills that I learned from teaching were not the same that I used in homeschooling. And like Maren said, sometimes it was a hindrance because I had to really get rid of all of my ideas about what learning should look like. And that took all the years. I mean, I'm still doing it. I'm still deconstructing or rebuilding my thoughts and trying to think critically about how kids learn.
That makes total sense. I appreciate you talking about going against the grain. That's actually something we're talking a lot about in my Differently Wired Club this month. That's the whole theme, is unconventional paths. And so not all families are homeschooling, but it is really hard when you are forging your own path and you're being judged by other people. And there is a lot of trusting the process. And you write about trusting the process in the book. And that is not easy to do. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what does it mean to actually trust the process and why is it so hard and messy sometimes?
I feel like all of parenting under that umbrella of the process, because the truth is like, we're all doing the best, whether we homeschool, send our kids to school or something in the middle, or with whatever we're doing in parenting, whatever decisions we make for our kids or whatever, we are just trying our best with the information we have in the moment. And of course, we all just love our kids so much and they're just so special and we want the best outcome for them. But the problem is like, we don't know. We don't know the effects of our actions or our decisions. We don't know that. And so I feel like a lot of parenting is trusting yourself and your intuition, which is really hard because we're just so new at it. We're all new at this. Like we've never had a 5-year-old, never had a 6-year-old, never had a 7, whatever, we're all just new at this. We've never had our kid. And like, it's so daunting to be in charge of this person's childhood. And so whether you homeschool or not, you really have to just trust your intuition, trust your child and what they are telling you, and just cross your fingers that it's all going to turn out. And you know what? It's not all going to turn out. You're going to make mistakes and you're going to wish you had done things differently. But that's life. That's life. And I think whether you homeschool or not, like there's a lot of trusting the process. Because even if your child is in school, you might wish you homeschooled, or you might wish you'd done a different school. Or you might feel bad about some decisions you made or whatever, even if it's mainstream. That's what just a lot of parenting is.
There's a meme that says, but does the process know that I'm trusting it? Which I love because like there's a lot of pressure on the process. But actually, I think it's better to put your trust in the process versus like trust in the outcome, which is just there's so many things that could go wrong to make the outcome not what you want, in so many ways. I mean, you can't control so many of these things that could easily get in the way of this outcome that you have in mind. I mean, that's like trying to guess the future and you don't know that, but you can trust the process. That's today. That's here now.
That's great. I love that meme as well. I want to talk about outcomes a little bit more, and we'll do that after a quick break. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words, straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. Angela, you said we all want the best outcome for our kids. And Maren, you were just speaking about whether we can't control the outcome. But how would you define a good outcome for our kids?
I like to think about, just in my own coaching, I ask parents this too, like, what would you like to see? What characteristics would you like to see in your kids as adults? And I think that's a great question, because those are things that you can even think about today. It's not like they would know their math facts. Okay. We don't have to worry necessarily about that, or all these like very detailed things about an academic accomplishment. But if you think about it as characteristics, or just, the way their life is set up, like I would love for my kids to feel fulfilled, to find work in line with their values and their vision, and they have a balance in their life of work and hobbies, and they're healthy, they're taking care of their mental health, all those kind of things. They have good relationships. They're able to maintain good relationships, those kind of things. Those are the things that I kind of like think about as success.
I was thinking similarly, but like more, are they able to be fully themselves? Not necessarily what I want for them, but like what they want for themselves. Are they curious about the world? Do they have things they love to learn about, they're excited about, whether that's work, job, family? And that's really hard, because truthfully, we do have expectations of our kids, even if they're like hidden or out there or whatever. And it's hard to let go and just really want for them what they want for themselves.
Great answers. So your new book is called Think Differently About Learning, a homeschool where children and parents thrive. And as I was reading your book, I was just, of course, like, oh my gosh, if I had this. I homeschooled my child from grades 3 through 8 and had no idea what I was doing. And first of all, it was very validating. I'm like, oh, I did do that. Oh, I got that right too. But it's such a supportive, very practical, and you tackle a lot of big questions about what's the goal of education and what's happening in schools. So I'd love if you could talk about an overview of the book and what your goals were for putting it out there.
We've been doing this podcast for 7, 8 years. And we talk about a lot of things on the podcast. But the book was a chance to really think deeply about our thoughts and ideas about education and about homeschooling and about parenting and everything in a way that we can't really do on the podcast, because the podcast is like 30 minutes or whatever. You can't really delve deeply into your thoughts. And so it was actually really great for us to be able to do that. We were able to synthesize kind of everything that we talk about into, well, we couldn't put everything in there, the best things, our best ideas and stuff into this book. And I would say you did a good job of describing. It is for homeschoolers, but it's also for anybody, because it's about parenting and education too. And there's one of the sections is for homeschoolers, but really we just think it's applicable to everybody, because we do talk about big things like connection and how important that is. And we talk about neurodivergence, and we talk about mental health, and just some really big things that we think are applicable to everyone, no matter where your child goes to school. And then we did want to lay out, if you are homeschooling, or if you're going to choose to homeschool, or if you're trying to decide what that might look like. And like you said, Debbie, we wrote the book that we would have wanted, because, at the beginning, we made so many mistakes. Well, all throughout, we've made a lot of mistakes. We did a chapter on that. So we made a lot of mistakes. And so we gave everybody the book we would have wanted, because we didn't have that resource.
Well, I just have to point out, so the book is broken down into 4 parts. There's foundations, homeschooling nuts and bolts, beyond academics, and then questions and more. And in the foundations section, where you really do look at school and education, the systems that most families are engaging with, which I thought was great. It was very balanced. I think a lot of people feel that homeschoolers are bashing traditional educational models, and it wasn't that. And you, in fact, talk about there are a lot of benefits to having your kid in a traditional school that a homeschooler doesn't necessarily get to take advantage of. So I appreciated that. And I loved that your chapter 2 is called Seeing Children as Humans. Say more about that. It's like, yes, of course, but it seems profound in some ways.
It seems profound. Yeah. I think that we overlook that thought when we're making decisions about education. To be honest, I think that most of the time it's about, well, what do we need from our high school graduates? And then we work backwards. And then we're like, okay, so by kindergarten, they need to be able to read because that's what we want from them, versus like, where are they developmentally ready? What are they interested in learning? Which seems so outlandish to even think about, when you're making policy about what our kids are interested in, because it's so separate from policy. But interest is more important than anything you can write on a piece of paper about what kids should be able to do. It seems so frivolous, but it's really like so much of, if you want kids to produce anything for you as a country, or, as a society, you really have to look at the child and ask, what are you interested in doing?
Yeah. And just beyond interest, like, you are a human being, and you deserve trust, and you deserve respect. And I think they generally are not given that. We aren't taught as parents to give them that. We are taught to tell them what's up and tell them what they're doing. And I feel like most of their day is planned for them by an adult. Most of the child's day, certainly from age 5 and on, is dictated by somebody else who thinks, well, no, what's best for them. We thought it was important to get back to the foundation that children are human beings. And a lot of times you can ask the question, would you say this or do this to an adult or your friend? And not that parents shouldn't have some authority and make some important decisions. Of course, we have fully formed brains and sometimes need to do that. But once you really peel back and see that they are a human being deserving of your trust and respect, your vision for what they're going to do all day changes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we use it as an excuse that our kids don't have fully formed brains, that, well, then now we get to decide everything. What we're not doing is preparing them to think on their own, then to be their own person, because eventually they will have developed brains and they need practice to be able to make choices on their own and think critically and all those things. And so we have to be accepting of their not fully formed brain and meet them right where they're at, so that they can not feel shame for where they're at right now. That's really huge.
Right. It's not a deficit or a negative that they don't have a fully formed brain. It's developmentally appropriate that they don't have a fully formed brain. Yeah. And I think what you're both speaking to is exactly why your book is for everyone, right? Because this idea of trusting our kids, treating them with respect, and you talked about planting the seeds for them to be critical thinkers. I just released an episode with Julie Bogart, who I know you guys love and appreciate. And we talked about dignity, which also is a word that isn't often associated with childhood and how children are treated. So I think this is such an important conversation for all families. And I want to talk about traditional models before we really get into some of the nuts and bolts that you share. You wrote a lot about high standards, that's kind of something in a traditional school it's like the gold standard, right? We have high standards and how they influence a kid's experience in school. Can you talk about what does that mean and why is it so important and why is it the wrong thing that we're kind of seeking?
I think as soon as you create a high standard, then everybody's really just focusing on that one thing and forgetting about all the other amazing learning that could happen. The potential is gone for pretty much 99% of everything else. And then also everybody works towards that thing, but mentally it's like in their mind almost unattainable because it's so high, right? So some people make it, but most people don't quite. And really nobody goes over the standard. There's a cap to it, right? As soon as they reach the standard, then they're like, oh, I'm done learning. I'm done thinking. This is great. Now I get to, go do whatever I want. It very much separates your life from learning and it creates the, kind of the rat race. I think, it creates this like, I have to work and like not listen to my body, not listen to myself and just do and work and produce. And that's where my value is because I get celebrated for doing that.
And I think it makes us teachers, administrators, policymakers, adults, politicians, whatever, feel really good to say we have high standards. I mean, it's a phrase that who can argue? Yeah, we have high standards. We have high expectations of our children. They are going to be very successful and smart if they do well in these 4 subjects. I just think it sounds good, but in practice, it's really not. It's like Maren said, it's teaching us to think only of the outcome. When learning doesn't happen in the outcome, it happens in the process. And it's not teaching children and adults to enjoy and love and value the process. It's teaching us to only value the outcome.
There's so much we could get into in your book. So I'm going to just pull out and ask the bigger questions that I think my listeners would want answers to. But we'll do that right after a quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you like this show, there's a decent chance you'll also enjoy the Shameless Mom Academy. Hi, I'm Sarah Dean, the founder and host of the Shameless Mom Academy. The Shameless Mom Academy is a podcast for moms that centers moms more than it centers your kids. I'm not going to teach you how to make baby food or how to make your 3-year-old or 13-year-old stop having tantrums. Instead, I'm going to bring you back to yourself. For the last 20 years, I've been helping moms through growth and transformation. Inside the Shameless Mom Academy, I help you identify who you are and who you are becoming. Look, motherhood is hard. It brought me to my knees many times and sometimes still does. Returning to who I am and who I am becoming allows me to decide how to show up in all those sticky motherhood moments, but also in all my other relationships and in all the ways I show up in my various communities. So come check out the Shameless Mom Academy wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm willing to bet you'll leave feeling a little inspired and maybe even completely fired up. And you'll probably laugh a few times because I promise we never take ourselves too seriously over here. With 700 episodes to choose from, you're likely going to find something that sparks and speaks to you inside the Shameless Mom Academy.
In part 2, you're talking about homeschooling nuts and bolts, and you start by talking about the common obstacles to homeschooling. I thought that was very exhaustive. The reasons why parents feel that they can't. And as a reluctant homeschooler parent, I definitely had my own reasons why this wasn't going to work. But I know that, and I hear this from parents, either a single parent who has to work full time or, families that don't have that flexibility to have a parent on the ground. Just for listeners who are in that situation, who in an ideal world would homeschool, but they don't know how to make it work. Is there any ideas for parents who are stuck that you've found over the years, maybe out of the box ways to think about homeschooling?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with thinking differently about what you think of as school or then homeschool, because we think about school as like Monday through Friday, 9 to 3 or whatever. And we do these 6 subjects. And so I think when you can deconstruct your way of thinking about learning and education, and you see that learning happens all the time, it's easier to think about homeschool differently as well. And so some of the obstacles might be like, I don't have the time to fit it all in. I can't be with my child Monday through Friday from 9 to 3. And so when we think differently about things, we can think about other times of the week, fitting in short little bursts of lessons with lots of play.
And I think you can think about, yes, the time of day and, what learning should look like can look different if you're thinking about it differently and you're really giving yourself and your kids credit for all the learning that they're doing. So it might be the swim team, that's learning. Your science museum pass, huge learning, right? What are the other things in your life that you do normally anyway? What can you count as learning, and how can you maybe cut yourself a little slack on the 9 to 3 or the not getting to the math lesson? Another great thing is, we're living in the age of online everything. And so there are so many things, anything you don't want to do, you could outsource pretty easily.
We're living in a time where there's so many supports. I'd love for there to be more, but there's just so many supports, so much more than when we started. And you can outsource in lots of ways, which we have a whole chapter on that. But whether it's online or in person or whatever, and those things count. Just because you're not sitting there from 9 to 3 with your child at the dining room table doing their curriculum or their worksheets, that is not the only way homeschool can look. There's lots of different ways it can look.
Yeah. You talked about deschooling or deconstructing. For a lot of parents listening with neurodivergent kids, there might be some detoxing that has to happen after negative school experiences. But I think that is a really important period of time to honor, and it can take a lot longer. And you talk about small and slow, it can take so much longer than we think, because there is so much unlearning that has to happen for us to really realize. I think when I was homeschooling in the beginning, I was very much well, we have to achieve this, this, and this. And I had my planner and my curriculum and stuff. And I had to keep reminding myself, wait a minute, we can do whatever we want. And every time I would say that, it felt more and more freeing, and I believed it more and more. But it takes a while to really start to have your eyes open to what's truly possible.
Yeah. And it takes a while too, because you might see positive changes. You might see oh, my child is really thriving. And that takes months or a year or whatever for you to see that. And that also gives you some positive feedback.
So I love the chapter that you have on guiding principles. That specifically, when I was reading that, I was oh, I wish I had had access to that when I first started homeschooling. And I think for me personally, that biggest learning curve that got better over time was just really leaning into the fact that we are designing this school together. Like, this is our school, we're collaborating. And with each passing year, that became more and more of the ethos of our school. So I'm wondering if there are any guiding principles that were most significant for you. Like, maybe you each share the one that was like the game changer for you.
I think one of the most important ones for me, and I know Maren too, so sorry to take this one, Maren, is inclusive and expansive thinking. For me, it was really important to myself as the adult to always be open to new ways of doing things and new ways of thinking, because my children are different from me and the way that they learn is different from me. And if I impose my ideas and preferences on them, that is not going to be best for them. And some things might feel really out there to me, or maybe something I've not heard of before, or maybe something that other people might dismiss or look down upon or whatever. But I think me staying open to including my children's whole selves was really essential, because we're doing something different from school for a reason. Everybody has one or many reasons that they're doing something different from school. And if I wanted them to have a uniform experience, they could go to school, but we're doing this different for a reason. And so it behooves all of us. Life is so much better when we include all perspectives and expand our thinking. And that requires me to stay open.
That's so good. I love that. And I think probably my driving force in homeschool and the biggest guiding principle for me and my family is, following our interests. And I will say, because of all of our neurodivergence in our family, like, I don't know how learning can happen any other way, to be honest. Again, like what I said earlier, it sometimes seems so frivolous, like what you're interested in or what you want to do. But honestly, with ADHD and lots of other things going on here, you're unstoppable sometimes when you're interested in a topic. And I see that in my kids even today. And even in school now, like they're going to school and they're still following their interest. They're utilizing that driving force now still in so many ways. And it's really exciting to see. And that's something you have to like experience and know how it feels to follow your interest, be curious, follow that curiosity, deep dive on something. During homeschooling, it was like we would give ourselves lots of time and space to kind of hyper focus on things sometimes. And it was just the most amazing learning ever. It was so great. And so it's really nice to be able to actually feel that and feel celebrated by doing that, because it really doesn't get celebrated often in a traditional classroom.
Well, we do that as adults, okay? Like we do that, right? We are interested in something and we deep dive and we're excited about it. We learn more and however we're going to learn more about it. That's how life is. And like our kids get to 18 and then we're like, okay, what are you interested in? What are you interested in now? What do you want to do? And they haven't had practice if they're in a traditional system of doing that. And so it's really, you're right, Maren. It's such an important skill and practice for your whole life.
Yeah, I imagine we're all doing what we do today because we like to dive deep into things and explore our interests. So, yes. So, Maren, you just mentioned neurodivergence, which is a great pivot because I do want to talk about that. And you wrote in your book that your kids have some learning disabilities, including ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and sensory processing differences. You just said, I don't know how learning can happen in any other way. And that really resonates for me. I'd love to know any other thoughts about the biggest benefits of homeschooling specifically for neurodivergent kids that you want to share.
Maybe another one of the biggest ones is just not feeling less than in a learning environment. I think neurodivergence really is, so much a gift. It really is. And it really is treated like a problem in schools. It really is, for the most part. And my kids never got that message growing up that it was a problem. It was more a chance to understand themselves better. They got to know their own way of learning, the way their brain works best. They learned to listen to that. We kind of created our days around that. And it felt really good. And it doesn't mean it was always easy necessarily, but it wasn't ever, shaming or felt like I got to fix this. It was more like, oh, how can I use this in a better way? Maybe how can we utilize this strength, or how can we support this challenge? It's just amazing. Like some of my kids now even have IEPs, and it's so much about like, it feels so unimportant. The goals that they set are like, they have, I don't even know, recognize this many words 80% of the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot think of a worse way to learn than to put it that way. Anyway, but they have to do it. But anyway, so yeah, my kids just learned that like the way they learn is just fine. We all learn differently, and we all have to figure out what works best for us. So it was great. I loved it.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit in the book too about how if you have a child who's neurodivergent, sending them to school, it might feel like the right decision because there are special ed teachers or therapists or whatever, people who are trained to work with kids like yours. And you might feel like, I don't have any training. I don't have any training in this. It might feel like the right decision. Like, I can't just pull them out and me, untrained, uneducated me, is going to do this. And to that, I would say the teachers at the school, the specialist teachers, they're doing their best, and they're wonderful people who do their best, but they are also working in the system, which has the standard, and your child is not fitting into that standard. And so what they're doing is a response to your child not fitting in that standard. And so they're trying to help your child meet a little bit of that standard. And what you could do in homeschool is just completely different. It's celebrating your child and helping them thrive in the way that they learn best, not in relation to this standard. And also, I would say, like, you are your child's parent and you know them the best. And so even though you don't have special education training or occupational therapy training or whatever, you know them the best. And that counts for much more than the people with special training. Not that you get special training sometimes, if that works for you, if you need that or whatever. But I don't want parents to feel like they can't do it because they don't have the special training.
I really appreciate you sharing that. There's so much that we're just not going to be able to get into today, but I do want to just point out that you have a chapter on, you share your biggest mistakes and best tips, which I totally appreciated and also related to a lot. You have a chapter on mental health, which I so appreciated. I wasn't expecting to come across that chapter in a book about homeschooling, but you're talking not just about the kids' mental health, but our mental health as the parents, which was so important. You also tackle screens and tech, which is another concern for all families. Before we wrap up, what is the biggest thing that people are like, yes, but how do I do X, or this could never work because?
I think most parents still ask about curriculum. So yes, but just tell me what to teach. Just tell me what's the best thing to teach. And so I think it's fine to ask that. There's nothing wrong with asking that because we all need some support in some way, and it's nice to have a curriculum, but we always talk about the curriculum should be working for you. You shouldn't be working for the curriculum. So it's there to support you when and if you need it or want it, if it's working for you. And if it's not working for you, then it's not for you. It's not the right thing. Or maybe it works once a week for you. That's great. Just use it when it's the right thing for you.
That's really good, Maren. The other question we get a lot is some version of, my child cries every time we do math, or my child won't sit down at the table, or something like that. Or it's really hard because we're always fighting. Me and my child and I are always fighting about homeschool. And that's very understandable. We've felt those things, very relatable. And I would say when that happens, it's important to remember that it's probably not your child's fault or problem. It's probably something you need to think about what you're doing, which is very hard to think about and hear and come to terms with. But if your child cries every time you do math, you need to rethink the math that you're doing, the way you're working together. Maybe you take a break from it. Maybe you take a long break. Maybe your child needs to mature. Maybe they need a different way of doing math. There's just lots of things you can think about for how that needs to change. But your child is sending you a message, and you need to hear that message.
So good. Your book is called Think Differently About Learning, a homeschool where children and parents thrive. First of all, I thought it was fantastic. As a listener, if you are considering homeschooling, you are homeschooling, or you're just a parent who wants to better understand how to support your complex learner and really parent them in a way that is prioritizing respect and trust and connection and dignity and all of those things, I highly recommend checking out Maren and Angela's new book. So can you let listeners know where they can learn more about you and connect with you?
Sure. We have a podcast called Homeschool Unrefined, and we have episodes out now. And our book comes out June 18th, and you can get that wherever books are sold. So thank you for having us, Debbie.
Oh gosh, of course. So happy to share this conversation. And listeners, as always, I will have links to all the things in the show notes page. So definitely go check that out. So thank you again, Angela and Maren. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with the phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at @TiltParenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.